I want to welcome everybody to the second try of the GSBF Golden Zoom, our quarterly Zoom series for members of GSBF clubs. And I want to introduce Sergio. We've had the pleasure to have him before, and he's excellent. Sergio is a visual artist who graduated with the BFA in Art and Design from Pratt Institute in New York. Sergio works professionally as a creative director for a major entertainment company in New York City. He also has a passion for painting and horticulture alike. Early on, he realized that bonsai was the ideal synthesis of both. Sergio is largely self-taught bonsai artist. However, he has taken workshops with numerous prominent bonsai masters. And while he has many cultivars, deciduous bonsai are his passion. You are definitely in for a treat tonight. He has an amazing artist eye and bonsai techniques, and you're going to learn some unique ones. So let's welcome Sergio.
Thank you, Dottie, and thank you all for joining my presentation tonight. Please, put the questions in the chat, and Dottie will be, or somebody else will be managing that. So I love questions. So one thing that I would add to that is I am, in case you're wondering, I'm in New Jersey. I'm on growing zone 6A, just so you guys know. And just to give you a little sense of the presentation is divided into 3 sections. The first section is sort of like a quick overview of my garden. The middle section is going to be a selection of trees in my collection. I will show you a variety of things that are hopeless, and how I was able to kind of make something interesting out of that hopeless material. Other examples are more about refinement, and so I think you guys will see a variety of examples there. And then the last section has 3 case studies that deal with 3 different types of grafts. One is the approach graft or root graft. The other one is a thread graft. And the last one, which I'm not sure if a lot of you have heard about it, is called a peg graft. And I'll walk you through that at the end of the presentation. All right. So about 8 or 9 years ago, I built a bonsai garden. It is not really that big. It's about, I would say, about 1,700 square feet. So by no means is a huge garden, but large enough, I would say, to hold a relatively modest collection of trees. And the first thing that I built was this arbor here in the back that you see. At that time, I wanted to build a structure that would give my trees some shade in the summers, particularly because I am more of a deciduous kind of person, and I needed a shaded structure. Now, I at the time, to be honest with you, I did not think about building a whole garden out of that, but the garden really grew out of that arbor. This section, many of the sections that you'll see with stone were originally all grass that I had to take out, and that put the stone. I would also mention that my intent was not to create a Japanese garden per se, but without a doubt, Japanese gardens have definitely influenced the way I sort of design my garden, particularly with the stone, the stones, and some of the water features that you will see. My collection is comprised of a lot of deciduous species that come from, I would say, a lot of them are Japanese, and there's a few that I have from European species as well. In this section here, you'll see a forest here of Japanese beech. Then there's other maples here. In the back here is an oak, and I think I have a stewaria somewhere down there. One thing, and I think it will be more clear in the next picture, this wall that you see here, that was not built by me. When I purchased a house, that wall was there. It was sort of like a courtyard, and it actually helped me define a space. And so it was easy for me to kind of envision a garden within that space. So that was really, really helpful, the fact that I had that kind of half wall already as part of the house. So here's another view. You'll notice I use two-tone gravel. In the perimeter of the garden, I use like a darker gray gravel. It's about 3/4 size. And in the middle here, you see other pictures, better pictures than this one. It was more of a light gray tan sort of color. I use also some large stones in the center of the garden just to complement the trees themselves. Here's another view. You can see here in the foreground, that's a hemlock. So I do have some conifers that I'm introducing into my collection. But again, most of my trees are still leaning heavily on the deciduous species. Late afternoon shot of the garden, and you kind of see here what I consider kind of like the center of the garden. Just to give you a sense of size, and again, we're looking at from another angle, the center of the garden. This tree here is an elm. I hope you guys can see my cursor. From the base to the top is 4 feet, 48 inches tall, about. Just to give you a sense of scale here, this maple back here is about 3 feet tall. So that maybe gives you a little bit of sense of scale. There are some large stones that I spoke about to complement the trees themselves.
I do have a question from one of the members. They said, how do you deal with leaves in the gravel?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I am constantly, particularly it is a lot of work in the fall, but I am just with a leaf blower. I'm out there leaf blowing maybe once a week or twice a week just to keep it clean. Now, I've also been asked, do you get weeds in the gravel? For those of you that might be interested, before I put I think it was about a 3-inch layer of gravel, I put wheat fabric in the whole entire area. Now, I do get weeds, but it's very easy to pull them out. So if you're on top of it, you should be able to keep your garden looking pretty clean. This is another view. Notice I have a little bit of a mossy area here on the ground, just because I wanted to add a little bit of interest even on the ground level of the garden. This is a Japanese red pine. Actually was a Yamadori from Japan. I'm not sure how or when it was brought to the US, but that's what I was told. So that's one of my few conifers that I have. Here you see a close-up of a large container of water. It's a self-contained water garden, essentially. And it has perennial water lilies. This is another water container. This one is made out of concrete, and this is inside is dwarf water lilies. They're really tiny. The flowers are about 1.5 inches or 2 inches wide. They're really pretty, and they really accent. They give a wonderful accent to the garden as well.
Do you have any problems with wind in your garden?
I do have wind, but I have never, and I don't know if I'm lucky, I guess I am a little bit, that I have never had a tree topple over. I've been asked that question because people notice that I don't have my trees tied down to the bonsai stands. But I've been lucky enough that I never had a tree blown over. I live sort of down in a kind of I want to say like somewhat of a valley in a way. So I think that maybe I'm a little more protected, but I do get a wind once in a while. I do. This is another view, and this is kind of switching now. If I remember correctly, this is kind of taken in September, and this is switching over, the garden is switching over to like to fall. You can see here a Japanese maple right in the center that is sort of turning more of a yellow color. And now we're in, full swing autumn. You can see here, this is a like very late afternoon shot that I took and the colors seem to just glow in that light. Another view of fall as well.
Beautiful.
You will notice too that I have some benches, and that light color, they're painted. Actually, I have painted these the single stands as well as the benches are painted. For me, it aesthetically is what worked for me best, rather than leave it just sort of raw wood. But the downside to that is, like, every year, every 2 years, I have to repaint those benches. So it becomes a little bit, well, certainly adds to the cost of maintenance and also labor as well.
Mhm.
Again, a close-up of the mossy area in the ground. That, by the way, it does take, I selected a type of moss that does well in full sun, but I have to water that area just almost as much as a bonsai. So it looks pretty, but for me, it takes quite a lot of work in the sense that I have to make sure that it gets water regularly in the summer. Another fall shot. This is an elm that you saw before. It's a Yatsubusa elm. And you can see the fiery red orange of one of the maples that I have in the garden in the back. Another fall shot. That's one of the beauties of keeping deciduous trees, right? Is that the fall color, you can't beat them. I part of the reason why I sort of have leaned heavily on working with deciduous is that seasonal aspect of seasonality. Every season it brings something new, particularly if you're keeping Japanese maples, as some of you may be familiar with. Spring is beautiful, summer as well, then the fall, of course, and then of course you have the beauty of the winter silhouette. So I just absolutely love keeping or working with deciduous trees.
Oh, look at that. That's gorgeous.
In the center here, you have a Shohin Salkova. And again, here you can get a clear view of that bench that is painted kind of like a cream color. Yeah, this is an Arakawa maple that you will see in a moment. So I'm jumping on to the second section of this presentation, and you'll see that. But Arakawa Japanese maples are excellent. They perform extremely well every single autumn. While other maples, some years are a little bit off. I have never had 1 year off with Arakawas. They color up beautifully in the autumn.
Gorgeous.
Very reliable performer in autumn. Another shot of fall. Right in the center here is a linden. That's one of the European species that I have in my collection. And you can see here in the center how these single bonsai stands, they're painted like a dark gray. Again, visually for me, it works well aesthetically. I know there's a lot of folks that they prefer the wood, which is fine. But for me, visually, these felt better within the space that I had to work with. Again, the downside is that there's a maintenance that has to be considered. Which is probably taken in
What time of year is this?
early November, I would say. Yeah,
Gorgeous.
early November. Usually the peak for us here is late 3rd or 4th week of October, but bonsai, at least for me, typically color up or peak a little bit later, like another week or two. So I would say this is early November. And that's it. Any before I jump into the next section, any questions on the garden in general?
Did you design it yourself?
Yes, I did. And the garden, I take the garden as a living, breathing kind of entity in a way, meaning that every year I'm always doing upgrades, looking for ways to improve the garden, et cetera, et cetera. So it's always, always something to do in the garden, just as much as the trees. Okay, if there's no other questions, I'm gonna jump into the second section of the presentation.
I do have a question. Someone asked if you have a growing area, and another person asked, are your stands movable?
Yeah, so okay, the first part of the question, yes, I do. It's not, you have not seen this, it's in the other side of the house. I have some benches where I keep some of the trees that are either I need to invigorate or they need some kind of treatment. Many of the trees are in boxes or you know, grow out containers. I do have also a grow out area that is raised to grow trees in the ground. So I do. It's just I haven't shown it to you in here. The second part of that question, no, they're not. They're actually being I pour concrete and those single stands as well as the benches actually. But the to give you an idea, the center in the garden. You know, in the center area of the garden, those single stands, I have 3 of them that are holding fairly big trees. I dug a hole about 3 feet deep, and it was pouring concrete just to make sure that was pretty solid. But they're not movable, no.
Okay, I've got a few more questions. People love your garden. What kind of moss rocks do you have? And what is the type of moss that you used?
Sure. Okay. So let me get that second question. Here you see the moss that I'm guessing you're asking about. And
Yes.
forgive me because I do not know the name. I forget the name. It's got a kind of a long scientific name. It is one that does well in under direct sunlight. Now, moss does tend, no matter, even with this one, they do tend to perform better under more shaded conditions. I think in this one, even though they can tolerate full sunlight, they do in parts of the, you know, the hottest parts of the year, which usually here is July and August, they do struggle a little bit. I have to keep up with the watering, and they do kind of, it does brown out a little bit on me, but it still does well. But I'm sorry, I do not have the specific name for that moss, but it's one that I just Googled it. Moss that, you know, that tolerates or grows well under direct sunlight. And it's very tight. It's not very hairy. It's really super tight, which I like. So you know, it works well. Sorry, the first part of that question, what was that?
What kind of moss rocks are they?
Oh, okay. So let me see if I can get a better view here for you guys of what I think you guys are asking, which is this here, these rocks here. Now, those I was lucky enough, I found those actually in my property.
Wow.
And I had somebody actually with a bulldozer just bring those over to the garden. They naturally already came with moss in there, so I was kind of lucky. The one thing that I love about those rocks is that they look very aged, very old. So that gave the whole garden a sense of age, which is kind of what a lot of us try to do with our bonsai anyway. But I found those in my property, so I didn't have to. They do have, and I'm sure you guys know about this. If you go to a quarry, I think many of them have stones that are already aged with moss in them, but they tend to be very, very expensive. Those rocks, at least from what I've seen.
Another question I have is, how did you come about assembling your collection?
It kind of grew. I mean, I used to keep pretty much exclusively all Japanese maples, believe it or not. And then it was a little boring because it was like, okay, it was Japanese maple, Japanese maple, Japanese maple, and then I said, I think I would like some variety, right? I mean, I think there's a beauty about variety, and so it kind of grew, and I started getting into other species, essentially, elm and beech, and but little by little it just kind of grew, and it really, I wasn't after, for the most part, I wasn't after a specific tree. Is whatever kind of caught my eye was what I ended up purchasing. But it grew over the years. Certainly, it's not something that I built overnight.
Right.
Building this for, I don't know, maybe for 15 years now, something like that. Yeah. A lot of my earlier, I mean, I've been doing bonsai now, I don't know, close to over 30 years. A lot of the ones from the earlier days, they're either dead or sold. So, but I started building a more serious collection maybe 10, 15 years ago. Yeah. Any more questions, Ari?
No, go ahead and go on.
Okay.
Oh, well, actually, somebody just said one. Go ahead.
All right. Okay. So if you remember that Arakawa that I just showed you, this is it. Back in, I think it's 2013. I bought this on eBay around 2012, 13. And this is a year after I purchased it. Now, I unfortunately, when they shipped this tree to me, the apex of this trunk here, of the left trunk, broke off. So what I did was, there was a side branch that I wired up in order to create my new apex and the new transition for that trunk line. And the other thing is, that year prior, I grew these long whips because I anticipated that I would need at least one or maybe two grafts. And next picture is 2 or 3 hours later from the picture that you just saw. And this is the tree was completely styled, wired, in order to kind of set the branch structure in place. You'll notice the weird, funny loop on the top. That's an approach graft that I did because I wanted to locate a branch right on the outside of this curve here. I would say that I'm a huge advocate for grafting, either approach grafting or thread grafting. It's a fantastic way to elevate the quality of your material. You may, if you have a tremendous amount of patience and luck, you may wait and maybe get a bud exactly where you need it in order to grow a branch. But many times that doesn't happen, and that's where grafting comes in, to great use. Like I said, you can place branches exactly where you want them, and elevate the quality of your material exponentially. The other thing that you may notice here is I rotated the tree counterclockwise to push the smaller trunk a little bit away from us. That gave the whole composition a little more directionality. It made it a little more dynamic, rather than originally the two trunks were completely parallel to the viewer. And you'll notice the chopstick, just marking the new front of the tree. Again, sometimes with bonsai, big moves are great, but sometimes smaller moves are significant, and it can impact the whole entire design quite a bit. A close-up of the approach graft. Here I'm using a couple of push pins to hold my approach graft in place. They sell something called, I think it's like grafting nails, which work great, but push pins, they also work fine as well. And yeah, go ahead.
Well, why did you do an approach graft versus a thread graft?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So I am, and I'll talk a little bit about it at the end of the presentation on one of the case studies. I usually lean more to doing or prefer to do a thread graft over an approach graft for a few reasons that I'll explain later. In this case, because of the location of where I needed the branch, it was just very easy for me to do an approach graft here rather than a thread graft. It just felt like a natural because I just laid, you can see here, right, the whip, I just laid it right on that, on that side of the tree, and again, it just because of the location, it felt like what I needed to do. You may also notice that I wired it, and again, I'll show you that later on. I think it's important right from the get-go to wire your graft, whether it's an approach graft or thread graft, in order to set the pitch of the branch in place. So the angle, the exit angle, and add a little movement to that branch. I think it's necessary to do that, or better to do that earlier rather than just wait. On the back of the tree, here's another detailed photo of a root graft. Technically, the root grafts are an approach graft, but most people refer to them as root grafts. And I will show you step by step at the end of the presentation how I do them. But here's one where, again, on the same tree, I did a root graft on the back to improve my nebari. Once again, root grafting is a great way to elevate the quality of your nebari. Here's 1 year later. Okay, you may notice this weird long shoot at the bottom. How that ended up, the story behind that, it was I was trying to do a root graft there, but I ended up kind of falling in love with the little sapling, and I decided to create a little small third trunk out of it, so I kept it. I was growing it long in order to thicken it up a little bit. You will notice on the top that I have that approach graft still in progress, but notice how the tree has gained a lot of ramification in just a couple of short years. Moving on to the following, I think we're skipping now 2 years ahead, and you can see, you can still see the what was originally the root graft, now like a small third trunk. I'm cutting it back to encourage it to ramify. And if you remember that little skinny piece here that I turned, that I wired up in order to create my apex, notice how much more defined or developed that apex is becoming. You might also notice that I made a change of the pot. It was, and I'll go very quickly to the previous slide. This was a production grade Chinese pot, and I think at this point the tree deserves something better. That's a Koyo pot of high quality, which I think it fit the whole tree quite well. This is the tree in spring. The unique thing about this Arakawa is, for the most part, I've seen Arakawas that are mostly green in the spring with a little tinge of red. This one is very red. It's pretty red in the spring, which I have not quite seen. So it's a bit of a kind of a sort of, I don't know if it's a hybrid or I'm not sure what it is, but it's very red for Arakawa. So this spring, this one was taken in the summer.
Wow.
Fall. And this is the last picture of the tree. This was the most recent picture. This was taken last spring in 2022, right before leaves came out. And you can see again the small third trunk, how it's becoming, how it's ramifying and becoming a little more looking like a small tree. at the base of the tree of the bigger tree.
So that little tree, that was your original root graft, but you decided
Correct.
to keep it.
Correct. Yes, I decided to keep it. In case you're wondering, that material that I use was taken from the tree. It was an air layer that I took, and it was grafted at the base of the trunk.
I don't know if you're going to get to this later. One of the members asked about your ramification process. Some people say to cut down to two
Yes.
leaves. Some say cut down to 2 or 3. So if you would describe how you do your ramification at some point.
Sure. So I will just touch on it right now. So yes, that is true. I cut back to 2, right? You always want to bifurcate. The problem with leaving 3s and 4s coming out of one point is that it's going to thicken, and it's going to give you little it's going to swell essentially, and it's not going to look very pretty. It's going to look very coarse. And that's why with deciduous, it's a lot of work, because you have to constantly be aware of that, and you always have to cut back to 2, not 3s or 4s. Now, it's a little bit different when you are developing a tree, right? You're not quite as conscious of that. You want to thicken a branch. If you want to thicken it, one of the best ways, or really the best way to do it, is letting it run, let it grow until it gets close to the thickness that you're targeting, and then of course you're going to cut back. But one technique I have to say that is controversial, I will admit, but has worked very well for me in order to like ramify my trees. And you'll see examples of other trees that I have that have developed very quickly within the span of maybe 4 or 5 years. One technique that I've used is full defoliation, and I know that there's professionals that would maybe would caution against that, and for good reason, because if you do not know the tree, if the tree's weak, you can weaken it more, or you can even kill the tree. So you have to be very careful with that technique. But for me, if used responsibly and used properly, it can really help you, double and triple your ramification in a much more, it really expedite essentially the process of ramification on your trees. The other thing I will mention is about pinching. Now, certainly pinching is more of a refinement technique, not for development. But once a tree gets to this stage here, pinching is an important aspect of refinement. The problem with Japanese maples, probably more so than a lot of other species that I have experience with, is that they will thicken very, very quickly. And we are aiming, right, for all deciduous trees, really, to have very, very fine tips. So what happens is, if you let those tips kind of grow, right, you're already kind of thickening those areas. And before you know it, you're going to have these thick branches that you're going to find that they don't look so refined. And most likely you're going to have to cut back and start over again, particularly in the apical area of the tree. So a lot of things to kind of keep in mind in terms of that. But again, one of the most important techniques that I use personally is full defoliation on my trees. And I understand that it's controversial. Not everybody uses it. There's some professionals that use it. Other professionals shy away from it. But anyway, so that's what I will say about that. This is a close-up of the base. I have been able to improve the base little by little by doing root grafts, which again, I will show you. I have a case study to show you in detail how I do that. And this is about 8 years. He said 8 years, if I'm doing my math correctly, 2014 and 2022. So you can see the progress, by comparing the two images.
Wow.
And again, by no means I am saying, hey, this is a finished tree. No, I have yet to improve on some areas. I want more ramification in certain areas. So it's always a process. I would say 98, 99% of all of the trees that we grow are in that, still in that process, right? Still developing, still being refined, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Building a deciduous tree takes a long time. It does take a long time, because even if I'm going to show you some examples where you might say, oh my gosh, he developed those trees very quickly, I still think that they would need a lot more work and a lot more refinement. Oh, sorry. Let me stop here. Any questions on this tree?
I have a question. I don't know how you can answer it. The little root graft that you did and you kept it. Initially, I thought that was kind of unusual, but it adds so much to your design, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Dottie. I've seen both sides of the coin, right? People say, do you really need it? Is it critical? And I would say, I'm not sure that it's critical to design. I think it can work. The design can work without it. But I like it. I think it's a bit of a conversation piece there. But I would admit that is it critical to design? Probably not. Probably not. But I do like it.
I do too.
So this is a Japanese white beech. This picture, I believe, is back from 2003, around that time. And it came from Japan. And it was originally a forest made out of single trees. And then it ended up at the Kennett Collection. Now, Kennett Collection, I'm sure that maybe you guys have heard about it, probably the largest private collection in the US. And this gentleman by the name of Doug Paul, he has imported a lot of Japanese trees or bonsai from Japan. This was one of them, and he at some point, and I'm not sure whether it was him himself or a professional that he hired, it was decided to plant it on a slab. And this is a tree, by the way, in 2014. So it has developed quite a bit. It's got quite a bit of ramification. And Doug Paul from the Kennett Collection had a sale in 2014. He sold a portion of his collection. I went there and I ended up buying this tree. And this photograph I took right when I got home. I took this photograph. This was a proposed front of the tree. And after looking at it, I thought that the back of it would make a better front than the original front that was intended. So I committed to kind of work from this side. I also, the other problem that I saw is the soil itself, the volume of it. I thought it was way too tall. As we all know, bonsai is about proportions as well. So for me, this was not in proportion. It was just way too big, and it took too much visual weight off from the actual forest itself. So my intent in the future, whenever I had the chance to repot this tree, would be to lower the profile of the soil mass, and you will see that in a little bit. And I suspect that the screen here was somebody put it there in order to hold the soil, etc. That's what I'm guessing, that why it was used. This is 1 year later. Oh, let me just back here for a second. One thing that I did notice that was bothering me is that even though it was ramified, you can see the ramification did not look disorganized to me. The other problem that I saw, and I think I'm going to draw here if I can, it was let me pick a color here. Okay. It was sort of like a lopsided triangle, and that bothered me. I felt like that triangle needed to have a more stable base like this. So I, through wiring and pruning and you'll see in the next picture, I'm bringing the right side a little bit down to start establishing more of a balanced and stable triangular silhouette of the tree. I should also mention that at this time, what started as a single tree forest, now it became more of a clump, because all the trees, after I don't know how many years, they all fused together. So at this point, it is more of a clump than a single tree, than a forest made out of single trees.
Did you cut many branches from that, or was that all from wiring?
I did a little bit of both, some wiring and definitely cutting. I'm cutting, directional cutting or pruning, in order to start or sort of organizing the branch structure. There was something else that I wanted to mention to you guys, but it just sort of escaped my mind. One thing I want to point out, for Japanese beech in particular, you have to be really careful when you wire it. If it does bite in a somewhat significant way, might as well just cut the branch off, because you will always see that. So it's a very unforgiving species in terms of any mistakes that you make in terms of wiring. So you got to be very vigilant when you wire something, not to let that bite in even slightly bit. Okay, so I just wanted to point that out. This is a picture that I took about a week before it was exhibited at the 2016 U.S. National in Rochester. This is what it looked like, fairly dense forest. At that time, I thought it was interesting to plant a bunch of dwarf azaleas on the bottom, but later on, I became very dissatisfied with them. I thought it was too much. It was too noisy for me, visually noisy. So I got rid of all of that stuff eventually. 3 months later, this tree was exhibited at the Winter Silhouette in Kannapolis, North Carolina. You might notice the glass or the plexiglass table, rather than I opted to use that rather than a more traditional wooden table. I wanted to represent almost like a bit of an island, and surrounded by water, but done in a way that it was a little more abstract, right? And hopefully in an elegant way that is not too distracting from the actual bonsai itself. In Japan, they tend to exhibit the Japanese white beech with their bronze winter leaves, which is what I did here this time around. But honestly, I do prefer the tree to be completely bare, and you will see that next. And this is was taken in 2020, this picture. You will notice too, at this point, I had already repotted the tree. The silhouette or the profile of the soil has been diminished quite a bit. It's a lot shallower than it used to be. I think, to my eyes, at least, it's a little better in terms of proportions. And you can see how it feels that the triangular silhouette is a little more stable and a little more balanced, giving sort of the feel of a more mature forest.
Beautiful.
And this is 2014 to 2020, so 6 years apart. And you can see, I hope you agree, that the structure of it feels in a way more organized than what it used to look like.
Yeah. It's beautiful.
Any questions on this before I jump into the next tree example?
Someone had a question that may not be pertinent for right now. It's if you could highlight the care and the work on tridents versus Japanese maples.
Okay, great. So I will, let's see, we can tackle that in a little bit.
Yeah.
Sure. And if I don't Dottie, please remind me
I'll
to
remind you. Yeah.
talk a little bit about that. Thank you. Okay, next example is a Japanese maple Kashima cultivar. This was purchases from Suthin, which is very well known. I'm sure all of you know him. Very talented artist out here in the East Coast. And this is what the tree looked like back in 2007, I believe. Unfortunately, because of an error on my part, a mishap, overwintering error, the tree suffered greatly. I think in 2011, and so most of the tree died back, unfortunately. And this is the tree in 2012, I believe, and it took a full year for the tree to really bounce back. I mean, it took a hard hit. I exposed it. I believe the problem was that I exposed it to the extreme cold, and a lot of the branches just completely died back on me. It was just an error on my part, and so wanted to mention that so that hopefully you guys don't make the same mistake. We have very frigid winters, which is something that you guys don't have, I don't believe, but we have very, very frigid winters. This winter has been a little bit of an outlier, a little bit of an exception because it's been very warm, but usually we get very frigid over here. In any case, the tree still had a lot of beauty for me. Wonderful nebari. The lower trunk had beautiful movement to it, and as heartbreaking as it was, I was committed to kind of bring this tree back to glory. And I believe that this is a case where I ended up with a better and more compact design than the tree had originally. So sometimes you can, as I say, when life throws you lemons, you try to make lemonade, and this one came up, I think, pretty good. Anyway, moving on to 2013, skipping moving a year ahead, you can see here how the tree now is getting a lot of health. I'm seeing very good extensions all throughout the tree, which is a great sign that the roots are doing well. And now it was time to start to think a little bit about design, meaning that I can cut back here, edit the canopy, start wiring branches in place, etc. So this is right a couple of hours later when I did some wiring and some cutting back. You may notice that my wire in certain cases is green. The reason for that is because whenever I have to bend branches, give them a fairly significant bend, I wrap my wire in floral tape. Lately, I've been using a lot of paper to wrap my wire, but sometimes for deciduous trees, it's really important because, again, especially if you're putting a lot of torque and pressure into those branches, that wire is going to bite in really, really quickly. Moving forward to 2014, now you can see where I'm going with the canopy of this tree. I'm getting really good extension, which is what I need in order to build my full canopy. And this is 2000. This is the same year at the end of the growing season. I let the tree kind of do its thing through that year in order to kind of, again, promote health, making sure that that tree was in full health before I gave it another round of wiring and pruning. So this is probably taken in late October or early November of 2014. Skipping a year to 2016, this is what the tree was looking like. I left this long whip at the top in order to do an approach graft down here, which I needed to place a branch down in this area right in here. And then finally, in 2017, this is what the tree was looking like. I saw this tree right after. By no means this tree was a finished product, but I was pretty happy after 5 years of development how quickly it bounced back. Had I kept the tree, the canopy, I wanted the canopy a little bit longer, a little bit fuller, a little more rounded. So there was still more work to be done. But this tree was sold. I think it's maybe somewhere in Chicago these days.
Wow.
This is a shot of that same year, 2017, the spring. Kashima has wonderful red-orange leaves in the spring. And yes, so 5 years between the two. And one of the reasons why I was able to develop the canopy so quickly is going back to that technique of full defoliation. I defoliated this tree, I believe, 2 times within those five or so years of growing it.
I have a couple questions.
Sure.
Actually, quite a few questions, but one person said they're learning so much. How often do you fertilize and what do you use?
Okay. So it depends, right? For
Yeah.
it always depends. For trees in development, I fertilize, more heavily, including chemical fertilizers like Miracle-Gro. For trees in refinement, I pull way back. I do not typically fertilize my trees until leaves have hardened off. Here in my area is around late May, early June. And then I start fertilizing the trees. What I use, try to keep it very simple. Mostly I use fish emulsion, which comes in a liquid form. You can find that in a Lowe's or Home Depot, with a combination of BioGold. Certainly not to say that, if you're not using BioGold, you can't grow trees well. Not at all. I'm sure that there's a lot of products that work very well, but I do like BioGold quite a bit. It has given me very good results, and that's what I use. So it comes in cake form, and so I use pretty much a combination of those two. There's another product that I use. I believe is made by Dyna-Gro, which is a more balanced fertilizer. I forget what it's called, but I use that sparingly here and there. But mostly, I would say I lean heavily on my fish emulsion and BioGold for the most part. I fertilize right after leaf hardening on more developed, more refined trees. And then I pull back completely in the heat of the summer. Around late July, August, I stop fertilizing it, and then I give it another, maybe a couple of doses of fertilizer in the fall.
And what's your favorite soil mixture?
Great question. I mostly use Akadama with a little bit of Kirio. Kirio is a little bit like pumice. Sometimes I even use pumice as well. I would say probably 15 to 20% to Akadama. I don't use anything else, not for deciduous anyway. I don't use lava. I don't use really pretty much anything else. I've been using Akadama for about 30 years with great results. The deciduous trees love Akadama. Again, everybody's different, and I've heard people that grow their trees in kitty litter, for example, right? And they're happy with that, and it's a lot cheaper. Fine, that's great, but that's what I use essentially.
Okay. And how often do you have to water in the summer?
Yeah, so summer, I would say typically at least 2 times, sometimes 3 times. It depends.
A day, you mean?
I'm sorry?
A day?
A day, yes. And for Shohin, it may be more. It may be 3 to 4 times. For the larger trees, maybe 2 times, sometimes 3 times. Depends if it's really, really hot or not. But I would say on average 2 times in the summer.
And someone asked about the green garden tape. How long can it remain on the wire before it deteriorates?
Oh, it lasts a long time, and you don't have to worry about it, because by the time that thing even well before it deteriorates, you're gonna have to remove the wire anyway, because it's gonna start biting in. So definitely anything that is wrapped, whether it's paper, whether it's floral tape, you really have to be very vigilant, because it's not like you can just leave it there. It will bite in. It's just that it will allow you to keep that wire longer, a little bit longer than if you did not wrap that wire. Maybe, I don't know, maybe another month and a half. But definitely it will end up biting in. But you don't have to worry about deteriorating the floral tape or even the paper. The paper lasts for a while, believe it or not.
Interesting. And do you fertilize after you defoliate?
Do I fertilize after? Yes, I do. I do, just to kind of give the tree a little bit of a push after I defoliate. Now, there's another thing, and it can get, I mean, we can be here all week, guys. But there's another thing that I'm sure you guys have heard about, which is partial outer canopy defoliation. That's a completely different strategy, right? But for full defoliation, 100%, save maybe some of the weakest branches. Yes, I do. After the defoliation, I do fertilize my tree. Yes.
Excellent. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, the next example is another Japanese maple. Believe it or not, it may not look like one, but it is. And this was actually grown by Randy Knight, the same guy that is well known for collecting those beautiful, awesome conifers, and he works closely with Ryan Neal. So this is somebody bought this, I believe, directly from Randy, and that person, that enthusiast, sold it to me, and I have no idea why it appealed to me. You may look at it and go, "My God!" But at the time, somehow there was an appeal, and this was the original front or intended front of this tree. Now, the reason for that, and I'll show you in a second, is that the back of it had this large, had a big, just a big hunk of dead wood here and a big scar here. And of course, from the other side, you don't see it. But I thought that this would make a better front. And again, the saying that when you cannot beat them, join them. Now, one takeaway here is, like, don't try to make your tree what it doesn't want, what it can be, right? So this is a Japanese maple that I wanted to be something like an oak in feel. This is not your classic feminine maple. It would never be that. So I thought that this would make a better front. So I committed to making this. And how do we make it? So let me explain a little bit here. When I repotted that same, that spring, I found a better Nebari. Now, the original Nebari was right, the one that you saw in the previous picture was right in here. That was the level of the original Nebari. I found a better one when I repotted the tree. I was lucky because that gave the whole tree a little more height, which I think it needed. It felt a little too squatty, so I got lucky, and I cut all the roots from the original Nebari off. Okay, so this is the tree after repotting. This is a tree after I carved it. So when I carved it, I made that scar even larger to make it one of the biggest mistakes I think that I often see is, like, when people try to carve it, they're very timid about it. So it doesn't look like there is real intent behind it. I wanted to make sure that if I was going to make use of this dead wood, that it would be a main feature of this tree. So sometimes that scar that was about this size originally, I made it way larger. As you can see, I even joined it, even went all the way up to kind of give that sense that this was an old trunk that got that was rotted. And of course, I carved this entire left side completely as well to try to make it a little more natural. And you know, and I did a rough wiring on the top to kind of set the general sort of structure of the canopy in motion. Close up of the carving and the base of the tree.
Did you use a Dremel?
I did. That's a good question. So when I carve, and I'm not, you know, I don't do a lot of carving. I don't like carving deciduous, except this, of course, one example that I think it was necessary. I use a combination of hand tools with power tools. So using just power tools many times can yield a very artificial look to your carving. So I think a combination of that with some hand tools where you kind of rip the wood down or up or whatever gives you a little more of a natural feel to your work. I painted, in case you guys are wondering, I painted the inside of my freshly carved wood with Sumi ink, with a black Sumi ink, just to kind of set it back. Just a detail of the canopy. In terms of development of deciduous trees, and this is I think very true for a lot of trees, a lot of species, is that you have to let them grow long and then cut them back. I know that we all want our gardens to have beautiful, perfect bonsai, but the reality is that many of the trees are always going to look a little mangy like this, like overgrown, because that's part of the process, right? In this case, I needed to let it grow to improve the transitions between the primaries and secondaries of my structure. And that's the best way to do it. And then, of course, you cut it back and you repeat the whole process once again sometimes for several years. And this is 2 years later. This is what the tree looks like. I'm going to show you the 2004. Actually, I'm lying. This is 3 seasons. Even though it's 2 years, it's 3 growing seasons between these 2 pictures. And as you can see, it really helped me find a better nevari at the bottom because it gave the tree a little more height, which I think it helped in the design as well. I saw this tree shortly after I took that picture in 2016, but by no means, even though it developed very quickly, by no means I took that as a finished product. There was a lot of areas in the canopy that needed improvement. Some internodes were, for my taste, were too long. I needed to refine that, shorten that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, but yeah, I was fairly pleased with the fast development of this particular example. Any questions on this tree?
Not right now. It looks amazing.
Thank you. Okay. Jumping off, and for fun, I added a conifer, although a lot of people think it's a deciduous conifer. This is a ball cypress. And this is, it appealed to me for a funny reason. A lot of the ball cypress that I see are really these huge monsters. They're really beautiful and impressive. Most of them are collected, of course. But this one was grown from, I believe, was from a cutting. And I saw this in a convention. I bought it back in December of 2016. And it appealed to me for 2 reasons. One, it was the small size of this tree. It was only about, at the time, was maybe 15, 16 inches tall. And it had a beautiful flaring nevari already that unfortunately you cannot see in this picture. But that's another reason why I purchased that tree. And so the next that next year in 2017, I decided to style it as an informal upright. The only interesting detail about this that is maybe perhaps a little more unique is that I left a second apex here. Now, this is another thing that we can argue. Do you really need that second apex? I don't think so. I think it could definitely, I could cut it off. But once again, I was finding that unique detail in the design. However, I became sort of dissatisfied with this tree. I became a little bored with it. I didn't think the world needed another informal upright. So, so I decided to do something a little bit different. By the way, notice the flaring base of the body here. Here you can actually appreciate it. It was quite nice already. So I decided to unwire the tree, and this is, I believe, in the fall of that same year. And I decided to create a whipping style ball cypress. And here it is, a couple of hours later. The only element that I kept from the original design was a second apex here that I'm circling right in here. I kept that. I still kind of liked it. I believe this is a year or two after. This is, I think maybe somewhere in July. The tree is right in here in the garden. And this is the picture that I took in October of last year. This is the most recent picture that I have.
And is there on wire on most of those branches, or does it hurt off?
Excellent, fantastic question. Yes, there is really quite a bit of work to be done when you have a whipping style. Unless you have a naturally whipping tree, you're gonna have to put a lot of work into it. That's why I would never have a second whipping tree. They take a lot of work. So I sort of devised a method of developing this tree where I built a cage. In the growing season, I built a sort of like a wire cage to bend the bigger branches down and keep them down. And at the end of the season, I take that cage off, and all I have to do is kind of refine the tips of them. So but it does take quite a bit of work. And the reality of these whipping style trees is that they will pretty much always remain wired. That's just a reality of it. I should also mention that I am a big proponent of going with a natural aspect or the natural growing habit of trees. This is the only example in my collection, I would say, that I went against the grain. The tree wants to grow up, but I'm telling it to grow down. So this is the only example in my collection where I'm kind of working against nature. Again, I'm a big believer that you got to work with the tree and not work against it. But this is one case where I'm basically working against a tree. One aspect of it that I really enjoy is the fact that it breaks, the branches are breaking the edge of the pot. It just goes beyond the edge of the pot, which I really like that detail quite a bit. It took me a while to figure that out. I was keeping them for a while. I was keeping them, above the edge of the pot. But I started playing with that, and I really like the results. Here's even a close up of that. Cool. You can see how my tips are all wired down.
I have a couple of. I'll wait till you're done with this tree.
Yeah, this is 2016 to 2022. So you can see the development of this tree in fairly short time. Go ahead, Dottie.
Yeah, a couple of questions. One was, how can we get on your list as potential buyers of your material? That's a sincere question.
Sure. I appreciate the question. I'm not really a grower. I'm not really in it to sell. I do sell once in a while, but very often I don't have things to sell. like I said, once in a while you may find myself, selling one of my pieces, but right now I'm not really a grower that has material to sell. So that's sort of how I would answer that question at this point.
Okay. And someone asked if the scroll is your original artwork.
Great question too. Yes, but this is a digitally composed scroll. I created that digitally and I put it on the photograph. I laid on top, so it's not a real scroll. It's just exactly. So I've been playing around. I like to play around a little bit sometimes in the computer, and if I like the results, I may actually one day make that scroll. But right now, it only exists digitally. Yeah.
Brilliant.
All right, moving on. Again, another one that seems hopeless piece of material, and this is a Kiyohime Japanese maple that suffer once again an overwintering error, and it suffered tremendously. Unfortunately, I mean that tree was at the time a while back was my best shohin. It was a beautiful shohin, and it almost completely died except for the first branch here. So this seemed pretty hopeless, almost like almost ready to be thrown in the trash can. But I decided to try to do something with it. It has quite a bit of age, and so I play with it. So I decided to kind of make it into some kind of cascade design. In this photograph, you can see it's overpotted because I needed to bring it back to health. So I wasn't really too concerned with the design of the tree itself, but more concerned about making sure that the tree survived. And in this case, you can see how at this point, by the time I took this picture, the tree seemed to be bouncing back quite well. But you can see the buds, the leaves just coming out. And this skipping a couple of years later, again, then I transferred to a much more suitable pot, but I was not very happy with the results on this. It had developed somewhat, some ramification, etc., but I was not happy with this. So I was searching for what could be interesting. What else can I do with this piece of material? And then I saw this. I saw this in somebody in Japan was selling this Chinese stone. I think it's a yin. It's called a yin stone, and it's a natural stone. I like the look of the stone. I particularly like the skinny kind of neck of the stone. It's almost like defy gravity in a way. So I decided that it would be interesting to combine the cascade maple with this stone. And I'm showing you a little bit behind the scenes of how this was built. This is the back of that stone, and I built with muck. I built like a wall. This area right here is where I'm gonna place the roots of my tree. Notice actually that even though it's a natural stone, it came with a concrete base, round concrete base that allowed me to secure that with the pot itself. This is another detailed picture showing me filling that whole cavity with a little bit of a mix of akadama with some pumice in this case. And you can see already the tree is in place here. And this is what came out of it.
Wow.
This is another view, 3/4 view, and I'm going to show you the back. Now the back here is where all the roots are coming. Now they're placed, and then I did a sort of a channel with muck and then moss, in order for the roots to eventually grow all the way down to the pot. This is last fall.
Wow.
And this is what the tree looked like. I believe this was taken last fall. You can see there's still much more refinement to be done in the canopy of the tree, but it's getting there. I planted a few mosses and whatnots just to complement the composition. And here to balance out, I'm going to draw here, balance out the composition. I use some dwarf azaleas on the right-hand side of the pot.
Somebody said that's insane. I love it.
Oh, thank you. And this is 1 year apart, from left to right.
Wow. That's crazy.
So I think part of the takeaway, I would say, is like, even though, again, some material may look hopeless, with a little bit of creativity and a little bit of willpower, you can often maybe create something that was even better than it was originally. So, it doesn't always work out, for sure, but definitely many times it's worth a shot. Speaking of that, well, before I jump in, any other questions on this tree?
I have a question as far as the moss. Do you have any trouble keeping the moss alive during the summer?
Yes and no. Some pieces survive, some pieces do kind of give me a little trouble. So yes, I don't, it's not, doesn't always look beautiful. I think that's the case with a lot of us growing bonsai. So many times for a photograph, before I take the photograph, I do kind of touch up my moss. I put a little bit of a fresh piece there. So it doesn't always look quite as good while in the garden. Like I said, some pieces grow very beautiful, very good, but there's other areas that are a little patchy and they don't grow quite as well. I understand that in Oregon or Port, around that area in the North Pacific West, I think moss even, grows everywhere. Not the case here where I am.
And someone wanted to know, how tall is this?
Oh, great question. That's only about, I would say, roughly about 14 inches tall, 15 inches tall. It's quite small. It's quite small. Now, remember, I started with a really tiny shohin, and again, but the whole thing now, it's about 14 inches, 15 inches tall. I'm going to show you another hopeless case.
May I go back?
Oh,
Someone
yeah.
asked what the plant on the bottom behind the tree is. Oh, that's the azalea, isn't it?
Right in here, that's an azalea.
Yeah.
Actually, it's a couple of azaleas, but they're dwarf azaleas. Yeah, yeah. Next case, I'm going to show you another one that looks a little bit hopeless. Let's see what we can do with this one. This is a Japanese white beech that I originally air layered right in here. This tree was too tall. The problem with this tree was too tall, no lower branches, and everything was here on the top. So I decided to create a multi-trunk design. And this is the following picture. After I air layered it, it did well that growing season. It grew well, as you can see here. But somehow the main trunk, which was here, died off. That just completely died back. I'm not sure why. I suspect that maybe there were not enough roots to sustain that bigger trunk. However, everything else survived around it, as you can see. But it looks pretty hopeless, and I actually did not know what to do with this. I was ready to either put it in the ground, throw it out. I just did not know. And then I said, well, maybe I can do something interesting once again with a rock composition. So I purchased an Ibigawa stone from Japan. And I decided to create a rock composition with this piece of material. And in order to do that, I needed to cut the root ball in half in order to fit into the stone that I had. And here you can see with my miter saw, I am gonna literally like chop it in half. Here I am cutting it right in half. And this was a do or die situation. I mean, I went just, I took a risk for sure, because I was cutting half of the root ball off completely, but there was no way that I could fit in the way it was originally, could fit it into the stone. So this is just like either it was going to live or it was going to die. And here's a picture of it right after I chopped it right in half. As you can see, I still have, quite a bit of roots there. So I was hoping that that would be enough to sustain what was left. A close-up of, some wires, to fasten and secure the tree to the stone. And I had to do a lot of work to thread those fine roots through a lot of the cavities in the stone. I mean, the tree took quite a beating through that process. So I was not sure completely if the tree would survive. This was what was created. So I turned the sideways branches that were originally, I turn it up 90 degrees up in order to make these all of a sudden turn into trunks or trees. And this was the result of it. So it did survive, just in case you're wondering. In fact, right now, maybe this weekend, I need to rewire the branches again. But it did very, very well last year. So I was very pleased with that. A detail of some of the ferns and whatnot that I planted to complement the composition. A close up of it. And this is maybe about 8 hours difference between the two pictures. So it took me quite a bit in order to kind of place that tree, thread all the roots into the stone itself. That was quite a job, and like I said, the poor tree took a beating through the process, but it did survive and is doing great now. Any questions on this?
What do you see as the how to develop the branching further on that?
Okay, so Japanese beech, it's a little more difficult, a little more challenging to develop the branch structure, say when compared to a Japanese maple, for example. But they're apically dominant. And when I mean apically, I mean even the tips of all the branches, they're very strong. You have to kind of keep those in check in order for the interior buds and little branches not to die off. But I would say, again, it's just finding opportunities to cut that back constantly so that you encourage, the tree to back bud. And that's where you'll start building slowly, but surely your ramification. So it's a process, and it's a longer process with Japanese beech for sure. They're definitely, I think, more difficult to ramify well than Japanese maples. Certainly, I think also they're much more difficult to air layer. I guess I was lucky with this one. I was able to air layer it quite well, but they're notoriously difficult to air layer as well. What happens is you do get roots, but sometimes it's only one-sided. You don't get roots, 360. That's a common problem that a lot of people have. But beautiful, beautiful trees for sure. The bark is absolutely gorgeous with that bright white bark that they do have.
Mm-hmm. Gorgeous.
I will mention now that I'm remembering somebody asked earlier about tridents versus Japanese maples. Tridents, in the sense of they're much more vigorous, less fussy and less finicky than Japanese maples. They grow very well. Those of us that maybe in warmer climates, hotter areas, I would always recommend, if you like maples, certainly, opt to grow tridents versus Japanese maples, which scorch very easily under sunlight. Tridents have much more resistance, and tridents, you can defoliate them because of their vigor, sometimes several times a year. That's something that I would never do on a Japanese maple. I talked about earlier about defoliating Japanese maples, but I only do that every other year, if that. With tridents, as long as your trident, you can see that is healthy, you can defoliate that trident every single year in order to, build or ramify your tree even more quickly. They're not quite as hardy when it comes to winter temperatures. They're a little more sensitive than Japanese maples, but that's really the only downside. They tend to be a lot more vigorous, and you can develop them a lot quicker, I think, than Japanese maples, for sure. I'm not sure if there's anything more beyond that question. Just want to make sure that I'm answering that properly.
I did have a question about the beech. What is your timing for pruning on the beech?
Okay, so for pruning on beech, let me think for a second. So in trees in refinement, more refined stages, it is very important that you pluck out the center shoot, the center part of that shoot, almost immediately before even the bud opens up completely. You have to kind of pull it apart essentially, and pull that and pluck or pinch that center, the center basically out. That's in order to prevent all the energy to go into the tips and kind of weaken the interiors. That will allow more. You'll be able to balance out the energy more effectively when you start pinching your beech. But it is a lot of work. You have to be on top of it, and sometimes I do pinch my beech a couple times a day when they're coming out, because in the morning it may not be ready to be pinched, but in the afternoon they may be ready. So, and I understand everybody's got lives. That happens to me too. Sometimes I come home and it's a little too late to pinch. So, but ideally you wanna be on top of that. Once the leaves harden off, I'm trying to think here. Once the leaves harden off, you can cut back. Now, let me just point out that beech, at least in my experience, is a little bit like a conifer, in the sense that if you cut back to no buds, let's just say to a place where there's no buds left in that branch, most likely that branch is gonna die back, particularly older branches. Now, for younger trees, not so much of a problem. I've noticed that you can cut those back and they'll back bud with not a lot of problems. But for older trees that are older, it is much more challenging. You have to be really careful when you cut back. I would cut back to 2 or 3 viable buds, at least 2, not 1. In order to ensure that branch will still be kept alive, essentially. So it's a little bit tricky with beech, for sure. Again, they do take. They're not as easily ramify, or they don't work with you as easily as a Japanese maple. Japanese maples tend to be a lot more predictable. When you cut back here or there, you can be pretty sure that they're gonna back bud in certain spots. Not so much with beech. You gotta be a little more careful with beech in the way you cut them back. Any other questions on that? There's so many nuances to like the development of beech that I'm sure that I'm just kind of oversimplifying this for now.
Well, we can't get everything in one night, but this has been amazing. I do have a trident question.
Sure.
How many times a year can you defoliate a trident?
I've heard people saying 3 or 4 times, depending on your season. If your season is a little bit longer, if you're in the south, you're gonna have a longer growing season that will allow you to cut, to defoliate maybe 3 times, 4 times maybe. Up here, we have a shorter growing season. Myself, I only do it once, not because I think I could get away with twice, but I just do it once. But the point here is that you can do it several times a year, whereas on a Japanese maple, I would never try that on those trees.
Thank you.
Sure. All right, so we're coming to the last part of the presentation. I have 3 case studies. The first one is root grafting. Technically, it is an approach graft, but a lot of people refer to the root graft because that's exactly what you are getting out of it. Here is another Japanese maple. And the problem with this one, the challenge with this one is that in its nebari, it had a white space here with no roots. Now, that groove that you're seeing here was from a previous failed root graft. And I decided to attempt, give it a second try. So I use the same groove. And in order to do that, I had to score the vascular layer, the cambium layer. And you can see that by that light green area to expose the cambium. Typically, or normally, I would say that it is far easier to do a root graft while you're repotting, simply because you have better access to your nebari. In this case, this tree did not need repotting, but I did not want to wait another year. So I decided to do it that same year, even though, again, didn't need any repotting. So what do we do then? I cut a pie-shaped section out of the soil in order to accommodate the future root ball of my grafted seedling that you'll see in a moment. And this is a close-up of my seedling. Now, this is a root right in here. This is the top root of the seedling, and this is exactly what is going to be part of my nebari, the root that is going to be part of the nebari. Close-up of me sort of trying to fit in the seedling into the groove. It is critical that they fit in that groove. Is super tight. Otherwise, if it's loose, it's bound to fail. And you can see here that it is so tight that I crush, and you may notice that on your monitors. I'm circling. You can see how I crushed slightly the bark of my seedling. That is fine. That is okay. That just shows you how tightly fit that is. In this case, I use another push pin. Now, because of the seedling was rather thin, I push the push pin through the parent trunk rather than going through the seedling. You definitely do not want to, drive that push pin through the middle of that ceiling, because you're going to create more damage than you need to. And sometimes when you're working with thicker material, you can drive it through the middle, not a problem. In this case, again, just was too thin. So the lip of that push pin is what holds the ceiling in place. It is, once again, very important that ceiling, the grafted ceiling, it basically does not move at all. Once that is all complete, I cover the entire thing with Japanese cut paste, and you can see here the root right in here that will eventually form part of the nebari. Here at the bottom, you can see how I'm fitting the root ball in that pie-shaped section that I cut off. And you may wonder why I'm wiring. That is sometimes important, because once the leaves of the parent trunk come out, it's going to have a full canopy, and it will shade the little seedling to the point where it'll probably most likely die back. So I had to wire it out and away from the canopy of the parent trunk. And here's a patient back in its pot with completed. The root graft is complete. And this is 2 years later. So if you remember, there was a white gap here. Here is my grafted root. And you will notice that there is a slight scar here. That's where it was cut back, and that eventually will heal over. I'll show you in the next picture what I do, because once you verify that the vascular layers have fused together, and you'll see here, this is a different tree. This is a trident tree. You can see here how the vascular layers have fused together, the seedling and the parent trunk. It is clear here. Once you verify that, you don't want to cut it flush with the base of the tree. You want to leave a stump very short, not more maybe than 1/4 of an inch. Let it die back, and then you make your final cut. I do this for safety reasons. You do not want to cut it right. To basically do your final cut right off the bat. Again, I think it's better to do that. I think you'll end up with better results than if you just make your final cut right off the bat. I hope that's kind of clear. Anyway, moving on to, this is the Arakawa that you saw much earlier in the presentation. This is another root graft, again showing you the little stump in there that I leave. I usually leave that around maybe 8 months to a year, let it die back naturally, and then you make your final flush cut. Sorry, let me take a little water because I feel like I'm losing my.
You're talking a lot. This is excellent information, Sergio.
Sure, thank you. Okay, before
I do have a question back on the road.
Sure.
Both in thread grafting and root grafting, I've also seen actually drilling straight through with, using a drill and put a hole straight through like the base of the trunk.
Sure. Yeah.
And or the tree or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's another. That's really a thread root graft, and what I'm showing you here is an approach root graft. Right, so there's 2 ways of doing it. Interesting enough, again, for me, when I do branches, when I try to develop my branches, I opt to do thread grafts more often than approach grafts. For root grafting, many times I go the opposite. I go for approach graft, but certainly I think it also depends on the location, what your situation may be. but absolutely that's another way to do your root grafts is through thread grafting. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Case study number 2. This is an example of thread graft. So this was originally a much taller Japanese maple that I wanted to create a much shorter, a more compact design. In this case, I wanted to create an apex on this particular trunk here that I'm indicating with my cursor, and build my apical region going to the left rather than to the right. So I use this long whip here in order to create my thread grafts to go to, for the apex, ultimately to go towards the left. And the thread graft is pretty much sort of describes itself, right? Is exactly that. You drill a hole through the trunk, whether it's the trunk of your tree or a branch, and you thread through a shoot, basically. So here it is the hole being drilled through the top of that trunk. These are a couple of splinters that I created, and I'll show you why. Folks sometimes use toothpicks. It doesn't matter what you use, usually some material made out of wood. And the reason for that is because when you thread it through, there's always a little bit of space that your whip kind of wiggles within that hole. You want to make sure that it does not. It stays very tight. So you just basically jam in this case, that's what I'm doing, jamming in a little piece of wood. And then, of course, gets cut off flush. So the tree eventually will heal all over that. One thing, let me go back a moment. One other thing to point out is when you thread it through, your first nodes should be relatively close to your trunk. The reason for that is because we always want ramification closer to your trunk, not far away from your trunk. So that's why something to keep in mind. You don't want to locate your first set of buds right out here, for example. I then wire it in order to give the exit section of it, which is the section I'm interested in, some movement and set the actual angle in the correct position. And here it is. I'm this is the whip that I use, thread it through the hole, and here is the exit section of it, which again, this is the section that I am interested in. Eventually, all this will be cut off right here like this. And this will be my future trunk line. Another example on another tree of the same technique, thread grafting. Here you can see I'm using a power tool, a drill, to drill through it. You may notice that I'm actually doing it on an old scar. You can certainly do that. The point is that you always want to drill through live tissue. Obviously, you don't want to do a thread graft over a piece of, a section that is dead for obvious reasons. This was originally here on the bottom. This was originally a thread graft, but then I reused that to do another thread graft. You can always kind of like almost like a chain sort of reaction in a way. You can no reason why you couldn't do that. So I took the opportunity for this long piece of growth to be used for another thread graft. The reason why I did this thread graft in this section is because notice how long this branch is with no ramification whatsoever. So I needed something closer to the trunk. Let me backtrack here for a second. Let me point something out. When you do the thread graft, any growth that comes in on the section, on the entry section, let's just call it that, you want to cut off because you want to divert all the energy towards the exit section of your graft. That's the section that I'm interested in. I want to make sure that that is I want to, divert all my energy towards that section of my whip, and everything else that comes out, any growth here, you cut off. Now, if you don't do that, will the graft fail? No, but you can, I think you can expedite the process by doing so. Usually for me, my experience, I can complete a thread graft within probably about 8 weeks on a Japanese maple. Now, if you're talking about hornbeams, if you're talking about beech, that may be a completely different story. And I think the timing on that is quite different. But on Japanese maples, you can perform these techniques and complete it very, very quickly within a growing season for sure. Here's another example on the same tree of a thread graft. Notice, and again, you may ask, when do I know when it's time to cut off? A good sign usually is when the exit section of the graft doubles in thickness to the entry section. Notice the differences in girth between the entry section and the exit section. Much like the root graft that I showed you a moment ago before, I don't cut this flush immediately. I let that piece, I leave a short stop and I let it die back naturally and then cut it off. And notice also the bifurcation close to the trunk. So I located my first set of nodes of that long whip. It was longer like this, closer. And then of course I cut it back and then bifurcated, in order to create my ramification once again, closer to the trunk.
Excellent. We have several questions.
Okay, sure.
Do you push the whip to the top of the hole or the bottom of the hole, and why?
Sure. I'm never really too concerned about that. I think it would make sense, right? If you want to go up, it would definitely make sense. And that's something, if I may, let me go back here, because probably I would tell you, to be honest, that maybe I should have this should have come out from here and not from the bottom. Now, it didn't really matter, but I guess we can argue that if the intent is for your exit section to go up, like in this case, maybe it's better to go from the top, but it ultimately did not matter at all. I don't think it's a critical aspect of thread grafting, at least in my experience.
Another question is, do you score the bark of the Zion or the branch to expose the cambium?
Sure, great question. I do not in the case of thread grafting. And I'll tell you why. And I'll tell you why also. If you even have 1 day of experience with bonsai, you can still succeed with thread grafting. The reason for that is because if you think about it, you're drilling a hole through the trunk, you're threading that section of that whip through it, right? If we think about it, you are leaving the tree no option but to fuse together, because as this grows and this gets thicker and the trunk itself thickens as well, the tissue is going to fuse together, unless of course for some reason the whip dies, the tree dies, obviously, et cetera, et cetera. It's so easy to do thread grafting. It's ridiculous, actually. You can have very little experience and you can be very successful with thread grafting because you allow the tree just no option but to fuse together. In the case of approach grafting, it's very different because what I've noticed is that exit angle where the branch comes out of the trunk in an approach graft, usually sometimes it looks odd, looks weird. The challenge that we have with grafting is twofold. One, it needs to be successful. That's pretty obvious. But the second, because we're dealing with an art form, it has to be beautiful. It has to look natural. So, we don't accomplish a lot by saying, well, my graft was successful, but it does not look good. I mean, then that leaves us not, that doesn't do us, a lot of good. So that's one reason why, generally speaking, I shy away from approach grafting in terms of developing branches, and I lean more heavily on thread grafting.
Makes sense.
Okay, I'm not sure if there's any more questions on the thread graft.
I have one. Yes, it says,
Sure.
do you need to seal the opening with cut paste?
I seal the, I'm sorry, repeat that again, Dottie.
Do you need to seal the opening with cut paste?
Yes, you mean on both ends?
Using the putty.
Yes, absolutely. I do. You want to keep dirt, water, whatever out of the area. So yes, I do seal it with the regular Japanese, the putty sort of material or product.
Excellent.
Here's a last example for the thread graft. Once again, this was a thread graft right in here, going across, and notice the difference between the thickness of the entry section, which it was cut off, and the exit section. Has absolutely more than double. Okay, so again, an excellent way and a relatively easy to master technique in order to locate your branches exactly where you want it. Another thing that I failed to mention to you guys is once you drill your hole, you want to drill your hole through the exit section of it. You do not you want to start here and into the entry section. You don't want to do the opposite. The part of the reason for that is because if you enter your with your drill through the entry section, you're just gonna guess where you're gonna land. You're never gonna locate that or pinpoint exactly where that exit point will be of your branch. So you want to enter through your exit section, if that makes any sense. Okay, last, I thought this was the last, but let me show you. I have one more case study, but the last on the thread graft is, I have heard that it is impossible, and I'm showing you here that it's not. This is a thread graft. Sorry, no, I am incorrect. This is actually the thread graft right in here. This was my, let me just erase this. This was my entry section of it right here, and this is my exit. Clearly, you can see how it's more than double the exit section, but I've heard that, and interesting enough, that the sap cannot reverse direction, so that entry section will never survive. This is a proof that it will. Now, whether you choose to keep it or not, that's another discussion. That would be up to you. But in this case, I wanted to photograph this to show you that both sections can survive. So the sap used to flow this way, and now the sap is flowing this way and is going this way. so it can reverse. Interesting enough.
Interesting. Well, this is bringing out a lot of wonderful questions. I have two more questions here.
Sure.
When you drill your hole, do you drill it level or do you have it in a slanted in the direction of your branch growth?
Oh, absolutely, in the direction of your branch growth. That's an excellent question. You have to, yes, you have to sort of, more or less do it in the direction that you want that exit portion of your branch to go into, whether it's left, right, up, or down, whatever. Yes, absolutely. You do have to do that.
And another question is, how close to bud swelling can you do a thread graft?
I'm sorry, how close the bud?
Yeah, how much can the buds be swollen, I think is what they're asking.
Oh, great question too. Okay, so yeah, that's a really good question. Best time, or I start as early as January. So if you're bored in the winter time, that's a great time to start doing your thread graft. Now, not that the tree will do much at all until it starts growing, but if you have nothing else to do, absolutely you can do a thread graft in the middle of winter with not a problem. Part of the reason for that, you want to get ahead well before the bud swell. Once the bud starts swelling, what happens is you are risking the buds to be damaged as you're threading that piece of growth through the hole. So there's a way that, and I've done it, where you can wrap the buds in grafting tape in order to kind of help it protect the buds as you thread it through. But far better to get ahead before bud swell and do it while the buds are really tight to the branches, because again, if you're likely to damage the buds as you thread that through.
Great, excellent. We are caught up.
Great. All right, guys, last case study, and I don't know how many of you have heard of peg grafting. It's a fascinating technique of grafting. I believe more people are starting to be more familiar with this technique. And it was invented, I believe, by a Japanese gentleman by the name, or a Japanese artist by the name of Ebihara. And he invented a lot of crazy techniques for developing deciduous trees. One of them is what a lot of people call peg grafting, and I'm going to show you here, or at least a version of that technique. So this is a multi-trunk Japanese maple that I am in the middle of developing this tree. Let's not put any focus on this here. You may wonder why that is. That's a thread graft in progress. We're not going to be talking about that. However, we're going to concentrate on the green arrow that is showing you a section. So basically the gist of this technique is, how do we take a piece of a branch that we cut off and we relocate that to another part of the tree? How do we do that, right? Sometimes when we have a branch that is being developed for 8, 10, 15 years and is well ramified, but in the process of developing that tree, we realize that, we may not need that branch and we cut it off and we throw it out. How can we recycle or repurpose that branch and locate it to another section of the tree? So I'm going to show you that in this case. So the green arrow is showing a section of the branch that I can cut off. I don't need it. And I do need, I need to populate this, it's a long story, but this tree suffered quite a bit with the former owner. And I took it upon myself to kind of try to bring this tree back to its former glory. Hopefully I'll be able to do it. We shall see about that. But the main trunk had a lot of dead branches that needed to be cut off, and I needed to basically repopulate basically the main trunk with all these branches. The red arrow is showing my selected area where I want to graft that branch that I am going to take from here. How do we do that? Following spring, we graft a seedling to the section of the branch that you want to recycle or reuse. Okay, so here it is. I sort of rigged it, the pot itself, rigged it in with the branches to hold it in place. And I grafted a Japanese maple seedling to the branch. In this case, I did an approach graft to the branch. You can do a thread graft, no problem. But in this case, I did an approach graft. That same year in September, that branch was ready to be cut off. And I'm going to show you detail here in a second. This is a close-up. Here is how I did my graft, a combination of grafting tape and aluminum wire. And at this point, I was pretty sure that the cambium layers had fused together, as indicated by the red arrow. Here is with the grafting tape and the aluminum wire removed. You can see how those the tissue has fused together. So at this point, it's ready to be cut off. The idea is that that seedling now is going to feed that section of the branch, while, as I cut it off, the seedling will feed that section of the branch. Here I am cutting that off, and I'm leaving a short stop, and I'll show you why. Here's the branch that I'm going to reuse right in here, and this is my seedling. Now, I don't need this anymore. This is the portion of it that I am going to reuse and relocate to the other side of the tree. This is a section. This is what it looks like. It looks rather odd. This is a seedling grafted, and this is my branch. Now, my branch being cut off is not fed, obviously, by the parent trunk anymore, by its original parent trunk, and now it's being fed by the seedling. I'm cutting off the top of the seedling because this is what I'm interested in. This is a schematic, quick schematic that I did to show you kind of the concept. And that short stop will form. I'm going to carve a peg, thus why people call it peg grafting. That peg, again, I will show you that in a moment. That would be inserted in a pre-drill hole in the new selected area. So this is going to serve as my support for this branch. The green area represents the area, the live area that is going to fuse in the new location with the parent trunk. 2 weeks later, just to prove that everything is alive and did well, it's got a little bit of leaf scorch, nothing to worry about, but the branch survived and is now once again being fed by that grafted seedling. Here is the writing here that I'm pointing with the arrow. This was my selected new area. However, I did not notice, unfortunately, that that area was not closed off. It's still what needed to, the tissue needed to roll over. So that was not a good, basically a good choice for my peg graft. So I needed to go to plan B. I needed to find a new location for the branch, which I did. I will show you that in a second. This is the following spring. And I am here a close-up carving the peg with hand tools. Now I've been asked, well, why don't you use, there's a tool that that you can do it very quickly, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not even sure what that tool is called, but I would suggest not to use any power tools. It's a very delicate sort of procedure that I think you probably want to do it by hand. If your hand is not very steady, I would get somebody to do it for you. But here I'm carving a peg. And here it is. And this is what I'm going to insert, and I'll show you in a second, into the pre-drill hole that is going to serve as my support. Anticipating that this procedure is going to take about a year or two, I went ahead and I repotted the branch itself with a seedling. I wanted to make sure that that it was good at least for the next 2 years, and in fact, it did take me 2 more years. This is the area, the problem area. This was the originally selected area, and again, I should have checked more carefully. I did not, and you can see the cambium edge right here, and this is all dead. So this is not a good choice. So like I said, I needed to select a new section, and this is it right here. This is on the other side of the same trunk. This is my pre-drill hole. Just for additional sort of support, I decided to use some wood glue into the hole. I'm not sure if those in Japan do this. I'm not sure, but I thought it might be a good idea. And this is my inserted right in here. That's my inserted branch into the hole. And I have fastened the whole entire thing via wire and some grafting tape on the bottom to hold the pot. Once again, just like in any other graft, it is very critical that that nothing moves. Everything is really fastened together tightly. And this is my again a close-up of the grafted branch. One thing that is difficult, and I had to take a guess, is when I made my hole, I had to guess on the angle of that branch. So you have to be very mindful of that. I wanted my branch to kind of go up, as you see here, in order to be sort of in keeping with everything else that is going on with the tree.
And someone asked, the peg is living tissue.
No, it is not. It is dead. It is. I carved it down to the core, you know, to the sapwood essentially. So it's dead. At that point, is dead. The only thing, and if I may, let me go back real quick. Let me point out very quickly that right here, this part here was alive. That edge right there. That peg is dead. That's all dead. That's all hardwood essentially.
And you essentially put the glue all the way around that peg?
Right, yeah.
Before you inserted it?
And inside of the hole, yeah.
Okay. Someone commented, simply amazing technical horticulture.
I call it horticultural acrobatics in a way, because you know, it is a great way to, again, repurpose a piece of branch that you may not need for your design. However, you may see other spots in your tree that you may need something a little more developed. Now, I've been asked, well, why don't you just, is it much easier to thread graft something? Yes, of course. And you can see here, right, that I have a thread graft right in here. The problem, not the problem, but the challenge with that, or sort of the downside to that, is that it's going to take you, you know, I don't know, 5-10 years to develop that branch. Whereas if you take a piece of from, say, down here where it's well ramified, you have magically a branch that is fully developed essentially. Now, I will admit that it did not play out quite the way I wanted, because this branch originally was much more developed, but because I needed to find another, like go to a plan B, the original section was here where I wanted to graft it. I was forced to cut it way back in order to fit it in where I wanted it. So it didn't quite play out the way I wanted it, but but it's still fascinating thing, and again, it's really worth a try if you have the right tree to do it. And so let me keep going here. You may notice this notch here. The strategy here as I move into the following year, which was last year in 22, is I want to start weaning off my branch, which is up here, off of the ceiling and being fed by the parent track, which you see it right in here. This is the edge right in here, the edge of where is being grafted. And based on visual observation, it looks like the tissue has already fused all around it, which is great news. But little by little, I'm going to try to wean off the ceiling off of the branch, which again, my approach is I cut off, I think this was done in June. I cut off about a quarter of the trunk of the seedling. And then I went and I made almost 3/4 in. So little by little, I'm cutting off this, the source of nutrients and water from this, and making sure that the branch starts getting fed by the actual trunk, which is ultimately the idea or the goal. So I believe this may be the last slide. So this spring, right after leaves harden off, I am planning to cut this completely off.
Wow.
And that was going to be, actually, I'm sorry, it's not here, it's going to be up here. That will be really where they say the rubber or the tire, hits the road.
Yeah.
Because right now it's still being fed, and when I cut it off, I'm pretty certain that right now that the branch is already completely fused with the trunk, which actually is a goal. So it took me about 3 years to complete. I am sure that more experienced professionals in Japan have done it quicker. I'm not sure, but I'd love to see that technique being used more in the US. I know that certain people are using it in tropicals, but I have not yet seen successful, at least not for me. Maybe some of you have seen it on maples or other deciduous species. But anyway, yeah. And I believe, this was a sketch that I did to show you guys what I think that tree is going to look like in probably another, I'd say probably 7 to 10 years.
Wow.
And that's it, guys. If you want, please visit me at m5bonsaiworks.com. That's my website. You can find me also on Instagram and Facebook. And I so appreciate you guys staying awake for me.
That was phenomenal. We do have a question. What about cork bark? Do you work with cork bark material?
The Arakawa, the Japanese maple Arakawa. Is that
he just wrote cork bark. I wonder if it was also oaks, cork bark oaks.
Oh, cork bark oaks. I do not. I have not worked with those. No, if that's what you're referring to in terms of oaks.
Right.
Cork bark for maples, yes, but not oaks. No.
Okay. Okay, last chance for any other questions. I think this has been a phenomenal in-service and presentation. Lots of thank yous. Learned a lot. Very informative. It was well done, Sergio.